Hello and welcome to another episode of the Construction Corner podcast. We are back live this week, so it's been a little while, guys. Since we've gone live, done this live for just a whole bunch of reasons. Travel, it's summer. This is what it is. So, Matt, my friend, how's it going in Michigan?
Fantastic. The weather here in the last week has been insanity, to say the least. It has rained just cats and dogs every day for almost a week. The sun is out now and we're dry. Things are moving again. The sites are drying out. It's a good time to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been very hot, as we were talking about earlier. So we just recently got AC, like in the portion of California, even when I lived in Oregon, like you didn't need AC. Like it's cool enough for most of the year. You needed heat, but really, maybe for a couple weeks a year. This year, it's been unseasonably warm. I drove up over the pass last week, and there is like no snow up and down the entire Sierras. It's which caused for alarm and like droughts and fire and all those other things. But I was walking up the hill behind me yesterday, and there was a couple sitting in a 2-foot kind of barrier little kiddie pool, right? Not those little plastic like dog pools, but a nice like structured kind of kiddie pool on their porch, sitting in lawn chairs in the water, drinking some White Claws or Truly, at 6, 7 o'clock at night, because it is just that hot. It's like 95. It feels like a blast furnace. We don't quite have the swamp cooler effect of the East Coast, but just unseasonably warm.
Yeah, that sounds brutal.
The East Coast always gets that humidity. So
yes.
And if you were wondering, we do have an awesome special guest, Scott Mason. He's got an exceptional resume. He's with the Facility Health Inc. company. They do all sorts of stuff from asset management and life cycle to commissioning, and we'll talk all about healthcare today. But his background a little bit is really just hard work, right? So I'm going to lead in with your dad being a plumber and still going strong at 81.
Yeah.
I think is one of the beautiful things, and kind of, coming into this industry, granted in a different role than your dad, but just that hard work ethic that's been instilled in you, and some military background. But without further ado, Scott, welcome to the Construction Corner podcast.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Dylan. Appreciate it. And I've had some good conversations, and I think that hopefully we'll be able to help out some people in the industry and shed some light on things, and maybe give some guidance. So free advice is always what it's worth. So there you go.
You get what you pay for here.
That's it. But
welcome. Hey, I'm going to jump right in and ask, because I didn't know this, but your father is a plumber.
So my dad has been a plumber since 1962.
Okay.
He's 81 years old. And I just talked to him this morning, and he said he's got 3 jobs going, and a commercial job and 2 residential. And he still, he wouldn't give up. My mom passed away this year, and he's downsized. And he bought a giant shed for all his tools, and he won't give them up. And, there's like, for people in the trades, they'll get this, but there's soil pipe cutters and stuff in there that they don't even use. And I'm like, Dad, you don't need this. Well, it's part of my life story. He's got 4-foot pipe wrenches. I'm like, what the heck are you? But anyway, I love him. And you talk about hard work. He set the pace for that. He's still going strong. He's a lifelong learner, which is something that I really embraced, and still today, it's part of what drives me to help the industry that we're in and we're involved in, and to look at issues and gaps and help solve those problems. But, my earliest memories, my dad, I grew up in New England, and he had a master's plumbing license in 6 states. So he worked all over New England. And part of that was, if I wanted to spend time with him, I needed to jump in the truck and go with them. And so I grew up on construction sites. I grew up digging ditches and carrying soil pipe. I put my first toilet in when I was 6 in the pipe and tobacco shop in Methuen Mall in Methuen, Massachusetts. So, and I drove a bulldozer that year that was bigger than our house. That was one of the things I remember. The thing was huge, but you know, that back in the days when you could go on sites, and I've always been involved with the trades. I swerved out of plumbing and went in electronics when I went in the Navy. So it's still physics, all works the same. And, you know, and then after I got out of the Navy, I spent quite a bit of time in the life safety industry and applied the electronics to that. But really it became about people and processes. So that's how I ended up where I'm at today.
I love it. That's a fantastic story about your father too. That he should be commended for still knocking it out at 81 years old.
Oh. Yeah, he's still a craftsman. There are a few of those around still, and
not many. So
yeah.
Treasure that, because that's amazing.
Yeah, he always taught us your work is your signature. So
I love it.
Yeah, that's really a beautiful thing to live by. Is, you know, having the craftsman, the lifetime learner, right? I think those are some core values that, you know, we we for sure can get behind. And,
well, when you look back at it, it's great. When I was in the midst of it, right? He was teaching me how to sweat copper. You know, I see a lot of med gas, you know, brazed pipe and copper stuff that he'd make me tear it apart, sand it, and redo it. There's no way that he would accept that. So it's, you know, it's more, I would call it industrial today. It's more, you know, how much can we get in? How fast can we get it in versus what does it look like? You know, is the pitch right? Are the joints sweat properly? All those things. So,
but you know what? I still notice that stuff. So I run a construction company, and I will notice immediately when we have a plumber that's put in pipe that's just beautiful, or an electrician who's got, you know, runs of conduit that take all kinds of abnormal bends and shapes, but it's organized and efficient. And those are the first things I clue into when I walk on one of our sites. So
you walk in an electrical room and that conduit is just, it's art.
Absolutely.
You're like somebody was somebody was an artist. It's beyond craftsmanship. So yeah.
Definitely. And your work is your signature. That's a good one. I may steal that from your dad.
There you go.
And I think that gets us into one of the first questions and topics to kind of dive into, and that's really asset life cycles. Is, you know, if something's not, you know, installed properly, the craftsmanship isn't there, you know, how does that affect the life cycle of that particular, you know, system, product, everything that goes into it?
Sure. No, it's a great question. And right now, you know, infrastructure is on the tip of everybody's tongue, right? Everybody's got a different definition of it. We can laugh or cry depending where you're at politically. But, you know, the fact is we especially in healthcare, infrastructure has been ignored, right? It's not sexy. An MRI is cool. A new wing is cool. A cancer wing is cool. Somebody will put their name on that, but they aren't going to put, you know, the Bill Smith Air AHU, right? That's not cool. Or, you know, the Tony Davis chiller project, you know, nobody's got a plaque on it for it. So it's something that is usually hobbled along, I guess is the best way to put it. You know, we live in a throwaway society, and unfortunately that has transitioned into how we maintain buildings. And it's not just healthcare. I mean, you look at education, you know, they're always trying to figure out, hey, how do we make this last longer? And, you know, part of it is on the front end, what's the design? Is it all about what's cheapest, or is it about what's best? And when you get into asset life cycles, that really comes into play. I know there's, you mentioned you're going on a trip here up north, and there's a hospital that I work with up there in Santa Rosa, and they have a compressor. I'm sorry, Novato, and they have a compressor that they change every 5 years because it fails that regularly.
Oh, wow.
And the problem is, to upgrade it to something else would cost them so much money to reconfigure everything on the pad where they have it, that it's cheaper for them just to replace it every 5 years. And it's just, you think about that in terms of, that's a design issue that probably could have been circumvented. Same hospital they built the whole hospital on pylons, right? But the pad that the generator and where the water and the electric and the high pressure gas all come in, it's not on a pylon, and it's sinking away from the building. So, I'm sure that there was some value engineering there, but at what cost? And it's usually the downstream impact is not noticed right off the bat, right? Because when you look at, when Dylan, you and I were talking originally, we talk about, in general, architects protect their design, contractors protect their contract, and everyone will say they're protecting the customer, but you're really protecting the budget and the time. And when it comes down to it, and congruently with those, and even when you have a PDC team that's associated with a hospital, they're all about time and budget. It's not about asset lifecycle costs. What's it going to take to maintain this? There's lots of examples. Fire barriers is one, dampers is another. Fire doors. You hear the maintenance guys, they're just pulling their hair out every day because they have to deal with that downstream impact. And those typically aren't caught in a warranty period. And even if they are, the building got a certificate of occupancy and it met plans and specs, and it's built to code. So the question is should it be built to code or should it be built to accreditation? And, that's what I always ask is, how's it going to be used? If you commissioned a swimming pool to be built and it wouldn't hold water, kind of doesn't really serve the purpose of its intent. And that really is where we're at. I think in that dialogue needs to be had very openly, because there's enough skin in the game on all parties, right, that need to be involved. Because if you look at it backwards from the contractor's side or the PDC side, they will say, yeah, every time I get my facilities department, the budget is blown up, right? Is that true? And if it is, then maybe we have a design issue in the beginning, or we have unrealistic expectations. And I think that there's got to be common ground. So, when we talk about solving that problem, I think that'll lead to an interesting dialogue, maybe how that can be solved. And with you guys' experience, you can help shed light on the other side of the coin, because I think there's a lot of value in having these discussions.
So there's a lot to unpack in what you just said.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good stuff there. I want to start with the design side. So with facility health, and in your role there, and I'm asking just out of sheer naivety, do you get involved ever on the front side, or are you specifically back end after commissioning, or what is your forte there? And how do you see it best working out? Is it best for you to be at the table with us and our design team?
Sure. I'll do a little background that'll help. So Facility Health came out of, we're 7 years old, and we are a SaaS software company. that has a consultative wing or arm. Our co-owner also owns an MEP company that does design predominantly in healthcare. And as part of that, yes, involved in master planning, involved on the design side, also heavy on the commissioning, especially with analytics. He doesn't believe that commissioning should really be approached without analytics, especially during that warranty period. It'll actually get to prove your design. So I think a whole other subject that we could swerve into, but so that's the kind of the background and the genesis of Facility Health. Is we started out to solve a problem on the capital planning and capital renewal side. How do you prioritize the assets that you have? Because in the facilities world, especially the old school way, is you'd ask your facility manager for a budget, and they'd either give you somewhere between a napkin and an Excel spreadsheet. And if you asked for the same budget the next year, those items may not be on that list, right? Because it's more emotional. What is going on at the time that I ask you for that budget? So one of the things that we created is, we start out with a facility condition assessment on either we can do it or the site can do it. And we look at all the MEP assets. We tier them so that the customer can scope out exactly what they want done. But we can, anything you would describe or term as an asset, usually it's a dollar value or a high need or a high risk asset, is something that they would put in their tier 1. So that's typically where we go. But then our software, we're tied in with RS Means, and we can look at the costs. We do a risk ranking. We use a 4-part risk ranking currently that looks at redundancy. It looks at area served. It looks at what kind of maintenance requirements it has. We look at various risk attributes, like what'll happen, NFPA 99 risk assessment. So we'll look at those and we'll assign it a score. So now if you have 2 air handlers, let's say, and they were both installed in 1984, they're due for replacement. Well, the first thing you look at is what's their, how are they performing, right? So let's say all those things are even. They were both installed in 84, and they're both mediocre in their performance. Well, where do they serve? Well, one serves the atrium and the other serves ICU. So if you have a limited fund, it makes sense, right? But if you're a donor, maybe you want the atrium so that it feels good in there when they're reading your name on the wall. I mean, so it's along those lines that you look at. So we are able to actually risk rank their assets, as well as what condition they're in, as well as when were they installed. So you can look at all 3 of those components and determine what risks, but what assets bubble to the top, right? And when you look at it nationally, we just had a report published in HFM magazine that we did in conjunction with American Hospital Association, where about 45% of all assets, MEP assets in healthcare facilities, are past their useful life. They're in a deferred status. So when you look at that, it doesn't mean they're all bad, but let's be, so we're all honest, right? I mean, I have a 20-year-old Yukon XL, and the thing runs great. I'm not going to jump in it and drive it out to see Dylan, though. So, but for driving around, it's a great vehicle. It gets our grandkids around. It's a great vehicle, but it's not new, and there is risk, right? Every day that you are not PMing it or even every day that you're using it, you're accumulating risk. So you have to determine what are those risk attributes. So when you get your limited amount of money, so let's say you've got 25 million in deferred assets, anybody that gets 25 million should be thankful that they got 25 million to repair that, because usually it's, well, I can give you 3, you know, and it's like, can I get 3 a year? And then maybe we can get ahead of this stuff. So there are health systems that's what we do. We help them look at it from a long-term perspective and generate a plan versus this is a crisis. So we get them out of a triage state. We have a discovery process. We bring them in what we call a fitness program, and then we move into wellness, which is a long-term care. So that is kind of in a nutshell how we approach it, but it's all software driven. Does a lot of other things. We do OpEx. You know, COVID was painful in the industry, right? For the healthcare industry. Financially, there's billions of dollars that was lost in hospitals. And that translates into, you know, how do we continue to maintain, because the square footage of the buildings didn't get any smaller. And they still had to be maintained, but the dollars to maintain them dried up. So it became more of a priority to figure out how to do that. And one of the conventional processes that a lot of institutions are using is reduction in force, right? You know, everybody contributes evenly. Well, I already said, if you had 1 million square feet, it didn't get any smaller, and you still need a certain amount of headcount to maintain that. And if everybody's contributing 10% of their headcount, that could further exasperate, right, what's already going on. So we get into the operational side as well.
Okay.
That was the long way to get to that. So sorry.
No, that's okay. That's all right. So with facility health and your ties to the owner's other interests, I get it. You're primarily probably MEP, but when you're doing assessments, do you also wrap in the other building systems, facade, glazing, roofing? You know, is it a holistic package that you?
No, great question. Yeah. Yes. So, our standard is all MEP assets, and then facades, glazing, floors and walls, rooftops, parking garages, those type of things that are some of the bigger assets and, quite honestly, higher risk. I mean, when you look at a roof, we look at that as almost a clinical asset. I mean, if you've got water, you're going to have an infection control problem. So, we have a great picture of that we show of an area of roof that is in terrible condition, and it's over a mechanical area, but all 3 floors below it are OR. And it's like, so if we have a rain issue, if we have a water event, you just shut down your main revenue stream. So never mind create a lot of infection control issues. So yeah, exactly. We can look at any asset. We have a lot of customers that like us to look at life safety assets. The problem is, a $40 fire extinguisher, and you've got a couple hundred of them. All of a sudden, those or emergency and exit lights start bubbling to the top because they're high risk. And it's more of something that you just buy out of your operational budget versus your capital budget. So.
Sure.
Yeah, there's a few big pieces I want to touch on. One is, if you're in areas prone to losing power, which as we've seen over the last year, California, Texas, as we saw in like hurricanes with Sandy in New York, right? A lot of these places are prone to power outages. And one of the things for like your emergency systems, especially in hospitals, is you need to maintain a 96-hour runtime.
Yep.
So in there, one of the major things that happened with Sandy is if all the tunnels get shut down in New York, can you bring diesel fuel in? Answer was no.
No.
So they had whatever whatever fuel was on site, and that was it.
Yeah.
So one of the things to when you're doing these risk assessments is that on, you know, can you fulfill these, you know, legal mandates?
Sure.
On top of that is looking at projects. If you're doing an MRI, an ICU, you know, something that somebody wants to put their name on, is to include, okay, you know, whatever, the MRI is $1 million. That's just for the MRI.
Right.
On top of that, now you need everything to operate it, but we might as well do things while we're in here around that MRI to, you know, does an air handler in the corridor need to be replaced? Does, you know, anything adjacent to this need to be dealt with? And you can put it into those projects. And then, you know, it's all leading to, you know, the ORs, MRIs, the shiny objects that we put into hospitals that do get donors, and to wrap some of these infrastructure projects into those versus a standalone infrastructure project, you know, like to replace any of the electrical gear that you probably can't get to, that's in a basement, that's, you know, got 3 floors above it in a hospital situation, or generators or pilings or piers.
Yeah. No, you swerved right into the, so Matt asked me a question early on, right? How, or before I went on got on my soapbox. So I apologize, but it's how, you know, where do you want to come into the process? And quite honestly, that it just answered the question, right? When you are looking at, hey, we're going to rehab the 5th floor and put in I don't know, a cancer center, you know, let's say, when we start to look at those things, then that's when we should start having that infrastructure conversation. So one of the things we're able to do is we're able to take that, isolate that, because it's not just, hey, what assets are on that 5th floor, but what assets serve that 5th floor. So you're able to look at that and say, hey, from a risk standpoint, these are things that we should look at. So, you know, floors and walls are easy, right? Because that a lot of times comes under branding and beautification. So you get projects funded that way. But when you're doing a renovation, it's all part of, you know, making sure that you've got great wayfinding and all those things come into effect. But what about, you know, the devices that are serving that area? You know, you mentioned, you know, ATSs. We see ATSs that they're antiques, man. They should be in a museum somewhere. And you're thinking, why is that important? Well, here's why it's important. If your generator turns on and your ATS doesn't switch over, you don't have power, and you will be shut down. And it's as simple as that. And
well, and on that too, just as a point, for some of the new code requirements and again, a lot of the health requirements go to the state. It's not necessarily done at a federal level. So with your state healthcare code and your facility guidelines, to know that one of the things that has been implemented over the last few years is you do need a 2-way communication protocol for your ATSs. And this is a very like in the weeds type thing, but you've got to put a communication link in your transfer switches to make sure that it reads from the generator, that start signal, as well as going back the other way to say that it works, and then to have a dashboard of all your ATSs, which in a hospital could be 50, 60, you know, a lot of transfer switches throughout for all your critical branch, your emergency branch, and then your just standby loads.
Sure.
So it's a big deal.
Same with damper positioning switches, right?
Yep.
I mean, that's often a value engineered item that gets taken out. And, you know, I get it. I mean, is it necessary? No, but we're moving into a different time in where skilled trades are far fewer and maybe less experienced. Because I don't want to, I think there's people like my nephew that, you know, we're staying with. He's an apprentice electrician, right? 2nd year apprentice. he started out, went to college, got to year 3 in computer science, and he's like, man, this isn't what I want to do. I want to do something with my hands. And, you know, and we talked about it and with his mom and dad, and we, you know, and he loves what he does, you know, and ironically he works in hospitals and he loves it. And, but when you start to look at the direction things are going, you know, I mentioned analytics on commissioning, you know, we're not too far off from the building of the future being remotely monitored and dispatching a SEAL team to go fix it instead of having a whole regular army camped out there. So I can see that we have, there's some healthcare systems out there that we work with, and they have general trades in the building. And then they have, for triage, they have more of the skilled trades that show up as needed. And if you can get predictive, that even becomes better.
So I want to touch on that a little bit. So I get it that the, you know, best case scenario would be to have you at the table from the very beginning, and then we can all collaborate and come up with a design that's going to fit the needs of the user, whether that's a hospital or a school or an office, but also, you know, protect the asset for the future. But let's shift away from that now to where I assume a lot of your work is done on buildings where you weren't involved in the design, where you're brought in after the fact. So when you go in to do an FCA on an older building, and this kind of ties into what you brought up about, you know, general lack in skilled trades, how do you as a group approach that? Do you have your own people that go in to do the assessment, or do you seek, you know, local MEP experts or you know, building experts? How do you approach that from a just from an overall global standpoint of who's going to go and set which condition this building is in? Who decides if it's a good, bad, or indifferent?
No, great question. You know, and part of that becomes a scalability question, right? And for us, we currently have our own staff of engineers, SMEs. Some of them are, you know, they're master electricians that worked in those facilities. Somebody that has experience to be able to do a proper assessment. So we don't have a bunch of college interns running around with iPads. So, you know, hey, there are companies. I'm just saying, we see it a lot, and
I've seen them, and
yeah,
that's where I was getting towards.
No, we want to go in, and part of our process isn't just to go look at the equipment, right? Because sometimes you can't go in a fan room, right? Because it's running without shutting it down. So you have to count on the on-site experts, the people that live with that product, that piece of equipment every day, to tell you about it. Hey, when was the fan wall replaced, or when did you replace a motor, or we've got a vibration in a shaft, and you know, this thing is 40 years old, and if it falls apart, it's going to explode because of the way it's made. It's, you know, all those things that you wouldn't necessarily get by peeking your head in, right, and reading a nameplate, which is, you know, that you could get me on another soapbox between FCAs or commissioning, because a lot of times it's more of a transactional or a tactical thing that's done. Let's just check the box that we looked at the asset, we started it up. Did you run it through its paces? I mean,
yeah. So Scott, if you want to, while we're here, how do you define commissioning? What's your definition, or Facility Health's definition of commissioning?
Well, I am far from a commissioning expert, but I get to play one in my job. So I defer to what, you know, our team has done, and we incorporate everything from OPRs, right in the beginning. So we're heavily involved from the client interface as well, but with the design team, so that bridge that we're talking about is maintained, at least the dialogue for it. Because, I mean, everybody has wish lists that they want, right? So I've been in project meetings where they want this wall done and it's $60,000 for the wallpaper, you know, and it's like, is that, I mean, we're talking about that you can't do this thing over here that you really need to do, but we're going to have wallpaper. We're going to commission an artist to do it. And it's like, I get it. There are competing interests, and I think we have to balance all those out, because the last thing we want is the institutionalized buildings, right? That don't bring anybody peace when they're in there. But the other side that went for the commissioning process is more of a phased approach. It involves being there not only for the startup, but being able to observe some of the installation practices, right? As part of the startup, it isn't just, hey, turn it on, let's see what it does. It's turn it on and let's see if it performs the way it's supposed to perform. And then we always have a training component that's part of that. So it's important that that it's not just a stack of OEMs, right? In the old days, it was a stack. Now it's a electronic file that goes somewhere that nobody ever opens or reads it. And unfortunately, all those things are needed down in that time continuum downstream. So it's about doing the training. It's about giving people an opportunity to ask the questions, look at how they're going to maintain it. I mean, well, one that we see all the time is dampers. I mean, Joint Commission, right? One of the accrediting organizations will not allow you to put inaccessible for a damper as a failure reason. So the question is, how did it become inaccessible? Because that was generally done during construction.
Somebody put it there.
Somebody put it there, and somebody put a piece of ductwork or a piece of conduit or a piece of pipe or a bundle of low voltage cable or something, right?
Usually not in the first construction. The first construction it's good.
Maybe.
Subsequent is where I've seen it typically is.
The BIM world, world is helping that out quite a bit, right? Where you've got an access shaft. So, but it as you know, I mean, it's what do you call it? Eminent domain. He who gets there first, gets it. I've seen contractors put pipes through ductwork and do all kinds of things almost out of spite, but it's you deal with that, but those are things that you deal with downstream. That becomes an accreditation issue because it's low-hanging fruit for the surveyors, and they just look at the report and say, "What do you mean it's not accessible?" And now you've got to solve a problem by cutting a hole in a wall, or moving stuff that really can't be moved. So those are some of the issues.
Well, and on that too, so with healthcare, so people that are not familiar with the healthcare world, Joint Commission is like the bane of everybody's existence in a way. It is like all hands on deck if Joint Commission is in the building for the week or whatever that they're there to inspect the facility. So that's pass fail, like you need to fix it or you lose your hospital license kind of deal.
So they get their funding through CMS, right? Center for Medicaid Services. And the more urban or the more rural you are, you tend to have a more of a burden on Medicaid services, reimbursement. So anybody that receives Medicaid funding has to become accredited through one of the AOs or through CMS. You can go direct to CMS. And you decide which one you want to go to. I won't use this platform to give my favorites, but you can reach out to me direct and I'm happy to. But having that panic mode every 3 years is not something that is conducive to a good employee or patient experience. Let me just say it that way. Because everybody does go into panic mode. And so getting a hospital open, you get your certificate of occupancy from your construction, and then you move into accreditation. And the building may or may not be built for accreditation. It's built for its occupancy. It's built to get your C of O. It's built per plans and specs and building codes, hopefully. But let's assume all that's true, but it may not have been built for accreditation. So I'll give you a quick example. There's a hospital, or a hospital in Tennessee. They built an MOB. And then they said, well, let's put an ambulatory surgical center in that MOB. Everybody's excited, right? They got a little revenue producer in that cost-sucking building, right? And so now they go for accreditation, and the surveyor, Joint Commission surveyor, says, where's your 2-hour fire separation between your building occupancy and your ASC? So what was probably a $200,000 fix or build during construction is now a $2.5 million problem that delays the project by 90 days. And, we look at that and say, well, that's an outlier. I'm working with a number of hospitals right now, and there's a lot of those outliers, and it's no one's fault, but it's everyone's responsibility, I guess, is the way, that we need. I think we need to look at that. So I think at some point that will bridge into our, how do you solve that problem? But it's going to have to be a collaborative discussion, because there are costs and there are, there is involvement from the client and the contractors and the architects and the facilities department. Everybody has to have an ownership stake in making sure it's right.
So who does the burden of responsibility of something like that fall on then? And this, in all candor, this is out of my wheelhouse. We don't work on hospitals, so I'm very unfamiliar with this. But, if you hire a design team in my world, or you hire me as a design builder, and we design a product and we produce it, and it meets all of your intrinsic needs, and it obviously passes building code, it gets a C of O. If you come to me after the fact and say we have this surveyor who's going to say it doesn't meet another level of accreditation or another level of approval, where does the burden of responsibility in that typically lie?
Yeah, the owner, unfortunately. You talk about, we started off the conversation talking about budgets being squeezed, especially operational and capital budgets. If you built a new building, you have no capital budget, right? They don't even want you to do preventive maintenance on the new equipment because it's new. You don't have to,
right?
They may not even provide staffing for that new building, and so you have to maintain that building with your current your current resources, people and money, and a lot of times, when it comes down to an omission like that, right? Because you would think that would be covered under an errors and omission. But the argument is it met plans and specs. It got its certificate of occupancy. So that, there is that battle, and I've said, well, just add one sentence: must meet accrediting organizations' guidelines. And they're like, well, that opens up a whole new risk on the other side, right? When you're the general contractor and the architect.
So to take that MOB example, so medical office building, now so a couple of things to kind of roll back a little bit is under that, you're now under business occupancy, which is a whole different set of design criteria. You do not have to meet any hospital code. It's a straight up office building. You're not, going to Joint Commission. You're not under, it's not submitted to the health department. It is an office building.
It's an office building.
That's what it is. It's the doctor's office building, medical office building. So it falls under that business classification or that classification. So in hospitals, typically there are many different types of occupancy ratings, classifications throughout that facility. So in the case of they you built an office building, right? And then they come back or halfway through or whatever the case might be, say, hey, we want to add surgery center to this. Now you fall under a different thing. So that is purely on the owner of, you told us you wanted a,
right,
you know, an apple, and then you switch to now we want an orange, or we want apples and oranges in the same basket. And now,
right.
oh wait, you got to build a different basket to hold the thing. So that's to kind of clarify a little bit on the occupancy ratings for those types of facilities, which goes back to the owner not doing the proper like program for their facilities. And it, you know, and then there's a whole bunch of other stuff of, you know, how far away from a hospital you have to be for offsite ambulatory, for finances, for like Medicare and stuff.
Right, all those things. Yes.
There's a big can of worms that gets opened for going into now offsite, you know, surgery centers, you know, to where it's an outpatient procedure. You don't, because now you don't have beds, you don't have, you know, anything else. You're not doing intake, right? It's a whole,
you know, your life safety is a lot of what changes, because the patient can no longer evacuate themselves, right? Because a lot of people maybe, you know, I don't know what exactly the demographics of this audience are, but, you know, hospitals are built to defend in place of fire, not to evacuate, where buildings like schools and commercial buildings, they're built to evacuate.
Sure.
So a hospital is compartmentalized. It's a lot like, I was in the Navy, and nobody ever likes to hear flooding, flooding, flooding when you're out in the middle of the ocean. But fortunately, theoretically, the ship is designed so that you can have some flooding. And but when you look at it, you know, the MOB ASC example, that was always going to be an ASC and an MOB. It was just, quite honestly, an oversight. It was, you can go back. Everybody has skin in the game, right? Everybody saw the drawings. They knew what it was going to be. I've been in another hospital where, you know, they didn't have sterile processing outside their ORs, and the new CNO was hired, and she's like, where's my sterile processing? And they're like, sterile processing? What do you mean? I mean, this is supposed to be a healthcare architect and a healthcare GC team, you know, and it's like, everybody's got to be involved, because I think healthcare is a very emotional build. It's almost like residential building, non-spec homes, custom homes. It's a very emotional experience. So it's,
yeah. And one of the things too to remember when we're talking about fight in place, it's for fire ratings. So typically you'd think just walls, right? To our fire rated wall, it's wall, deck, and floors. It's complete 2-hour barrier for a lot of that stuff. So you're looking at, you know, drywall ceilings, you're looking at concrete floors. Like it is not a half-hour ceiling. Yeah. And dampers, like everything else. It's a big deal.
I have a lot of ties back. My grandfather managed farms, so he had milking stools around. If you've ever seen a milking stool, right? They have 3 legs. Yep. So there's, you know, fire barrier management's a 3-legged milking stool. It's a 3-legged stool. It has dampers, it has doors, and then it has barriers, whether that's floors, ceilings, and walls. So, and all those have to be maintained to that fire rating. So,
well, Scott, first of all, I appreciate you coming on. This is a facet of our industry that I still don't know a lot about, but I knew absolutely zero about prior to starting this conversation. But because you come from a very different aspect of the industry, I'd like to ask you a question we often get into with lots of our guests, and that is, what in your mind is the biggest problem you see in our industry, in the construction industry globally? And the bigger question, how do we attack it?
Yeah, we get asked that a lot because we do consultative work on solving this problem, right? I mentioned we're doing gap analysis with a number of healthcare systems right now between their PDC teams and their facility management teams. And I think one of the things that it comes down to is those two teams are typically siloed in every organization. And it would be great if they were made to, if you watch the old police shows, they're all sitting at the same desk facing each other. That would be great if they had to come into the same office and have lunch together, so they had to solve problems together. And I think because that PDC team is the sorry about that. Technical. No kids or animals, just my lighting. So that PDC team is the opportunity for the owner's voice, right? They are the conduit to the contractors and the architects and engineers. So I think that is a key element, that if we can solve that communication breakdown issue, and express the needs, because I think there's frustration, right? If your job is to protect the budget and the timeline, and that's how you're measured, what are you going to protect, right? If your job is to protect the asset life cycle, how are we going to maintain this for the future? That's the heart that the facilities team looks at. They look at little things like blocking and walls. Why wasn't this blocking done properly? Well, it's because it was cheaper, easier, and more expedient not to do it. Is it a code requirement? No, but it should be somewhere in the hospital's requirements if it's needed, because as they've learned downstream, they may need that. So I think that communication is important. I think, as in every industry that I've been involved in, having good partners is part of that. So if you have a great internal communication, and we can put some systems and processes and guidelines in place, bumper rails, if you will, so that everybody knows what the rules of engagement are and how we're going to solve these problems, then we can communicate that up to our partners. Because if we look at our general contractor as just a contractor, then you're probably going to get low bidder. You're not going to get the one that's invested in what you're trying to achieve as a client. And similarly with your architect, if you want the architect that is best known for their artistic flair, and that's great. We beat up architects. One of my good friends, she's an architect in Grand Rapids, and I always give her a hard time. I'm like, hey, if you're doing master planning and you hire an architect, that's what you're going to get, a new building, because that's what architects do. But actually, she has a different approach, but that's a whole other subject. We can talk. I can get you in touch with her. But when you look at that whole process, it's understanding what all these different stakeholders, not only responsibilities are, but what their passions, right? And nobody has the intent of, I'm going to build a screwed up building and punish the facilities team for the rest of their lives. Nobody starts a project that way. Everybody's got great intent and they want to do what's best. And I think let's start there and then figure out how to build those gaps. I think that is communication is I can't say that enough. If your top three things, communication. It's like being married. So
great answer, Scott.
Yeah. So that's where I would start. And how you do that, it really is a culture shift. And, that starts internally with the organization, and they have to understand they have a problem, and then be okay with creating an environment that people can solve that problem and work collaboratively. So,
Scott, where can they find you?
So I'm at facilityhealthinc.com or s.mason at facilityhealthinc.com or on LinkedIn, Scott Mason. happy to have, future discussion. If somebody disagrees, love to. That's how I learn. So I'm okay. I said I'm a lifelong learner, and I will apply that. I will actively listen and take whatever valuable insight you have to share with me. So, but I think that's probably the other important part. Don't be so married to your opinion that you're the only one that thinks it's right, because I think a lot of these decisions are made in vacuums, and not everybody is taking into consideration all the stakeholders. So,
Scott, thank you so much for coming on and spending an hour with us and our listeners. And guys,
quick.
It does. Time flies when you're having fun.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I know we covered primarily healthcare today and healthcare facilities, but a lot of these lessons, a lot of the downstream stuff goes into a lot of other building types. Hospitals are some of the most complicated buildings you can put together, but it goes to show, from a facility standpoint, from a owner's standpoint, from a design team to a contractor, having that team together, whether you're building a school, right, dealing with people that have never built a building in their life, and now they're taking on, a $20 to $80 million project is a big change for most. So whatever types of project you guys are building, again, keep communication at the forefront of it. One of the big things too is to put together some checklists, some standard things to go through and what you need for a given facility type. I know that's not a sexy thing to do, but it's a functional piece that'll really help your communication. And, as with all of our shows, guys, if you like it, if you learn something, go ahead and share with a friend, share with somebody else in this industry. Our whole mission here, our whole kind of guiding principle is to help the industry. We're going to talk about stuff that doesn't get talked about, or does at the lunch table or behind closed doors, but not out in the open. And we want to bring a lot of these things, just to the forefront of kind of lessons learned. Nobody's, we're not naming names, we're not doing anything like that, but to bring lessons learned to the forefront, and from our experience, from things that have gone good or bad on projects, and to help you guys become better. So that's the whole premise of this show. And so share it, get the word out. And we thank you all for listening.
Yeah, appreciate you guys. You're doing great work. And I think that's the heart of it, right? How can we help others get better? None of us can do it alone. So.
Yep. You nailed it, Scott. Thank you.
Yep. You guys have a great night.
We'll see
you. Have a happy 4th. See ya.
Likewise.
And that is this episode of the Construction Corner podcast. Until next time.